Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's just make sure everything's working on my end. Let's see, how's it going? Okay. That looks good. Okay, looks like I can hear everything I need to hear, see everything I need to see, and that's all pretty good. Let's turn my mic a little bit, make it a little louder so you guys can hear that a little better. But overall, things seem to be okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, students, whenever you're watching this. This is Mr. McRitchie. I'm here to review some stuff from Unit 3 with my students as they're just getting back from spring break. And we have a test fairly quickly coming back from spring break because I'm mean. Mostly just because we lost a week of school due to weather this year, and things got moved around schedule-wise in a way that's not the best. So, I'll be waiting a little bit before I get started here to see if any students pop in with any specific questions they have over assignments that we've had in class these past couple of days prior to coming back from break. Mostly, I would assume their questions will revolve around some FRQs that I assigned before we went on break. They had some time to work on them in class, but based off how many of them look like they're done, I'd imagine they procrastinated a little bit. So this is meant to sort of help them out with that. If any of you guys start showing up, feel free to pop in the chat and just say hi. If you have a question, feel free to just start typing away. And if you're watching this after the fact and I don't answer a question that you have, feel free to type them in the comments to the video. I'll do my best to type a response to that if I can. And make sure I can help. But in the meantime, I will just sort of sit and wait a couple of minutes before we get really started. And if no one shows up, I'll just go through a few of the FRQ things that I think are important, that I can see as likely problems that could show up on test day. So give them about a couple more minutes for people to pop up. If they don't, then I'll just get started on my own. Make sure I have everything working on my end, that everyone can see everything that I need to be able to see. So let's just test it. Yeah, there's the FRQ. Okay, cool. Good. All right, that looks good on my end. There we go. There's all of the stuff there. 4 FRQ problems. Yes, that checks out. Framing, zoom, and everything on here. Yeah, maybe make this a little bit bigger. Let's go large. Not bigger than that. That's more readable. Let's see if huge is also good. That's massive, but that should work perfectly fine. And if I, whoa, terrifying. And if I have to draw something, I'll probably draw it on whiteboard. I have one over here. I actually should grab that right now. Dipping off camera. Got a whiteboard, got some markers. Worst case scenario is I go through the things that are the probably trickiest on these FRQs. Yeah, let's see if that helps anybody. Get started here in, I'll give it like 30 more seconds. Try to get students to watch a video I'm doing live during their spring break. Hilarious idea. If any show up, that would be amazing. I'd be mostly shocked though. But I swear to God, if they turn in this stuff late, and I made a video where I explained things, ooh, they're gonna be in trouble. Okay, well, let's just get started a little bit. And if they pop in with questions over stuff that I've already covered, I'll just say it again, I don't really care. Okay, so the first FRQ, the Fisherland FRQ, hits a few things from multiple units. I'm not going to cover all of this because some of these are honestly pretty easy, and not all of this is Unit 3 stuff. Like, the first two are both things from Unit 1 about how PPCs work. This is a PPC with increasing opportunity costs for both goods, if you're ever wondering. It would never just be one or the other, it's both. That it's increasing opportunity costs for because of this bowed out curve here, signifying that as we produce more and more capital goods, I'm giving up a larger and larger amount of consumer goods. Basically, the slope gets steeper as we go down the line. Full employment for B, that's just anywhere on the line. That'd be easy enough. Now, recession would be some unemployment, so that'd be a point inside the curve. None of that should be new information, although A's wording is a bit tricky. D and E are Unit 3 questions, and for those that are watching this after the fact, these are the types of things that are super essential to be able to pull off for the test that we're having for Unit 3, and for Unit 3 in general. These are the sort of go-tos of your Unit 3 content as it pertains to the AP exam. So D says, identify a fiscal policy action that the official and government can take to address a recession. Okay, well, we have to take it to assume that every economy we're looking at in this class is structured like America's economy and that their government has similar economic powers. So let's keep it with the most baseline level, right? Your most basic level of fiscal policy, the sort of simplest version of it, is that it's actions taken by the government to sort of help stabilize the economy, right? So if we're looking at that and we're looking at, actually, let me do something really fast. I'm going to move this over here. That way I can see the chat separately. It's a little easier for me to keep track of. Fiscal policies are actions taken by the government to stabilize your economy. In America's economy, those really boil down to like two super basic powers. The power to tax and to spend. Those are the two main economic powers. So they're in a recession. In our class, we'd say that they're operating below full employment. They've got too much unemployment. And what's the government to do if there's too much unemployment? Well, they need to try to stimulate the economy, to get it up and running, to get things up to speed. So when it comes to government spending, that's very straightforward. That is just spend more money. So a possible answer to D would be to increase government spending. That is a fiscal policy because it's done by the government. It'd help in a recession because it's an increase in spending. That's all great stuff. Alternatively, a secondary answer that would work, these are equally good answers. If you said both, that's fine, would be to lower taxes. Because if we lower the tax level in the country, then people would have more money to spend and could therefore spend more. Both of these things would raise GDP, raise overall spending, raise the amount of money that businesses are bringing in, which would allow them to employ more people, which would get you out of the recession. So D's best answers would be increase government spending or decrease taxes. When it's fiscal policy, largely we're talking discretionary, meaning things that Congress actually has to do, like a new spending bill or a new tax bill getting passed. So spending and taxes are kind of your go-to fiscal policy answers. When you're seeing a recession, you need more spending in your economy. So higher government spending or lower taxes because it gets you more overall spending. E, assume that no policy actions are taking place. What will happen to SRAS? This is a thing my students have come to know and love, and everyone who takes AP Economics loves. It's called the long-run self-adjustment. That being effectively how the economy gets back to full employment in the long run. So what I'm doing right now is I'm sketching a little graph of what this economy should look like on an ADAS graph. Now, this question doesn't ask you to draw anything, which is largely like very nice and helpful and kind of the question, but you should be able to draw it. So this is like a normal aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, right? Price level, real GDP, everything labeled properly, right? To be in a recession means you're operating below full employment. Below full employment meaning that we are a situation like this, where your LRAS, the vertical line that represents our ideal level of production, is a little ahead of where we are right now. We are lagging a little bit behind of where we're supposed to be. So, what happens in the long run? Well, basic economic theory states that given enough time, an economy will always try to self-correct, will fix itself, will get back to full employment, and get back to where it's supposed to be. So, somehow I've got to go from this drawing to a drawing in which all three of those lines intersect at the same spot. Long run equilibrium. The question asks what happens to SRAS, short run aggregate supply, because in the long run, it's actually the SRAS curve, the short run aggregate supply curve, that shifts. And the reason why is because in the long run, wages can change. Wages are your big kind of variable in this. That in the short run, wages are seen as sticky, that they don't change very often, that you don't get pay raises in short windows of time, which, yeah, that's annoying but true. In the long run, that stuff can and does, fingers crossed, change. So, what'll happen? Well, we are below full employment, right? Bad. We want to be producing more stuff, making more money, right? Cool. Well, what could businesses do to wages that would let them produce more stuff, right? Well, they could cut pay. It wouldn't be fun, but like you could conceivably pay people less, which would allow you to have more money as a business. You could hire more workers to cover the production. That'd be cool. You could buy more resources. You could invest in more capital, whatever. You could use the money you save by lowering wages to produce more stuff, which would, if we look at the graph, let's say we get businesses to produce more stuff. That is SRAS. Oh, this marker is fully dead. Wow. I've got some old expo markers here on my desk, so let's test this out. Is that one good? Oh, well, kind of. No, that one's also bad. Don't make me use the same color. I'm going to go through a Rolodex of markers here. I'm going to erase this a little better. Whoa, I really messed with the color here. Okay, I'm going to use this same color that I've now just kind of messed up, but whatever. This is what's going to end up happening. That your SRAS curve will eventually increase to get back to full employment. Remember that when it's asking about this SRAS, this long-run self-adjustment, the basic idea is that SRAS has to shift to get back because in the long run, wages are the one variable that really can change. And a change in wages changes our overall level of production because how much I pay my workers determines how many workers I can afford. So if I lower wages, I can increase the amount of workers I have, or I could buy more resources that would allow me to produce more and get back to that long equilibrium. So for E, it says to what happens to SRAS and explain. That's where it's annoying. You have to explain a lot. In my class, I give kids like a paragraph, basically. I'd say it's a paragraph. It's one sentence, but it's a longer sentence. The idea being that in the long run, firms will lower wages. This will allow them to hire more workers, acquire more capital, buy more resources, etc., which will allow them to produce more, increasing SRAS and returning the long-run equilibrium. That would be like the perfect answer for E here. That'd be like your best way to frame it, is that full spiel. In the long run, firms will lower wages, which will let them hire more people or buy more resources or purchase more capital or whatever you want to say there, which will allow them to produce more stuff, shifting SRAS to the right, getting them back to full employment. If it asks what happens in the long run, your economy's got to self-correct. You've got to get back to a good spot where all three lines intersect, like here, where there it is. This new spot where all three of these, there it is. Mirrors are confusing. Where all three of these intersect. That's what you want. Okay. That's the first question. Second question. The economy of Moneyland has an actual unemployment rate that is less than the natural rate of unemployment. These, for the love of God, read the first line in these questions. Before you get to A, read anything above it, because this tells me a lot. Their unemployment rate is less than the natural unemployment rate. What does that mean? Well, your natural unemployment rate is what it should be, how much unemployment you should have. If it's telling me that my unemployment rate right now is less than what it should be, what does that mean? Well, we have too little unemployment, so we are actually above full employment. We have too many people working. Weird. We're in a positive output gap or an inflationary gap. Asks me to draw an ADAS graph. Got you. Of what that should look like. What's happening in my economy right now? What is my graph looking like? All right. Can do. Yellow. Right there, LRAS. Y1 and PL1 for my current equilibrium and YF for full employment. This is what this bad boy should look like. LRAS in the opposite spot, because right now at Y1 I am ahead of YF. I am producing more than I should be. That's the above full employment thing. Tip and trick here. A good trick for your AP exam FRQs. Read the questions carefully, like looking here. It says that my current price level is PL1, my current real output is Y1, and my full employment output is YF. What does this tell me? It's telling me I got two different labels for these X values, right? Y1 and YF. Meaning, they shouldn't be the same point. Like, if this was an economy at full employment, I wouldn't need two separate labels for X values, because I would only have the one X value of where the economy is perfectly lined up. But because it tells me there's two different X values, then I should have, like, the LRAS and my equilibrium not at the same spot, which is important. B, suppose that consumer spending increases. Show how that affects price level and real GDP. Easy. Consumer spending. What does that affect on this graph? SRAS, AD, LRAS. Well, spending, consumer, producer, government, foreign, doesn't matter. Spending always affects demand, because how else would we track the demand for everything than by your spending? So if consumer spending increases, which it is in this question, aggregate demand should increase. So we draw it, and it says to show the effect on the current price level and real output. Okay, this graph's going to get very busy very fast. Should look something like this. Our aggregate demand has increased. To be clear, this is not a self-correction. That's not what it says is happening here. It's not saying what happens in the long run. It's just saying, hey, a thing happened. What happens on the graph? We get further from where we're supposed to be. We go further away from LRAS. We are straying further from where we're supposed to be. That we are in a positive output gap and spend even more money. Oh, God. We're leaving where we're supposed to be kind of in the dust. So, graph-wise, aggregate demand increases. That's the idea. C, identify one fiscal policy action they can use to get back to full employment. Okay, well, now here we are. Oh, God, far ahead of where we're supposed to be. We need to go back, like pump the brakes, throw this thing in reverse, get us back to where we want to be. All right? So we need the government to decrease our overall spending as an economy. How do we do that? How could I have that happen? Same path as the last question. It's either government spending or taxes. Pick one. For government spending, I need less spending because I'm trying to get GDP to slow down, so decreased government spending would work. For taxes, I would raise them, because if I raise taxes, then people have less to spend, can't spend as much, and that would hopefully, ideally cause aggregate demand to go back down and down even further, because we need it to drop a lot. We need to move really far back to get to that LRAS. We are far away from where we're supposed to be. So that's the basic idea for C. We need to do a contractionary fiscal policy. And again, those examples are cut spending, raise taxes. Those are your two basic ones. And then D is just like E on the previous question. It's a long-run self-adjustment problem. It's asking, hey, the government doesn't do anything. What'll happen in the long run? Again, it tells you SRAS. The AP exam is helpful sometimes like that, where it'll drop a hint. It is telling you, hey, SRAS is going to do what? And you're like, oh, right, in the long run, SRAS shifts to get back to full employment. So if that's happening, which way do I got to shift it? Good God, really far to the left. Like, I got to angle this in reverse. I'm sorry, this feels so weird. Okay, here we go. SRAS has to shift really far back. I'd get to, like, up there as the intersect. I need supply to drop like crazy to get back to full employment. So I need supply to decrease. What'll happen? It'll decrease. Why? Here we go. That long paragraphy sentence thing again. In the long run, firms will. In this case, they're gonna pay them more. It's a cool thing. They're in a positive output gap, an inflationary gap. You should pay your workers more as you go along. That'd be like ethically the right thing to do. But then there's this cool little trap card thing that happens where, hey, we're paying our workers more, so I can't afford as many of them, which, yikes. Don't want to deal with that. So we raise our workers' salaries, we pay them more money, and we have to lay some of them off, which will hurt our ability to produce things, which is why the SRAS decreases. So in the long run, firms will increase wages due to like the higher price level, because good God, look at your price level here. We are going far up here. And in doing so, we'll have to lay off workers or can't afford as many resources or can't afford as much capital, which will decrease supply. And we'll get them back to full employment, which is kind of what we want. Now, for 3 and 4 on this, hopefully the kids read the instructions, which was don't do D or E. 1, because these are long FRQs, and 2, because we have not covered Unit 4, 5, 6 yet, so they'll have fully no idea how to do these two. Or these two. So, on question 3. Open economy that's currently in a recessionary output gap, they have ample reserves. They don't know what this means, it's not important. At least for this unit. It is important in Unit 4 for the love of God. But in Unit 3, all I care about is that we're in a recessionary gap. Understood. Draw me an ADS graph. Can do. Boop, 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 boop. SRAS. A, D. Recessionary gap. That's like the first problem, where I'm going to be lagging behind of my LRAS. So something like this is what my graph should look like for question 3. It says, again, this is just like last time. I told you, if they're telling me multiple X labels for YF and for Y1 respectively, that means I'm not at full employment, which it tells me right here, they're in a recessionary gap. I'm not at full employment. So I need to be in something like this. That's all of A, which is great. B, the government doesn't do anything. Okay, how will it adjust to full employment in the long run? Okay, this is the, again, to be clear, I used this long run self-adjustment thing in all of these FRQs because I really want kids to have this explanation down. So if you're like, wow, Mr. Big Richard, you really are saying the same thing a bunch of times. Yes, it's very repetitive. That should make it easier, which is good. Be happy that it's repetitive. Because it's just a pattern you have to notice. So what happens in the long run? All right, what can change in the long run? Boom, wages. I'm currently below full employment. I'm not making enough stuff. I need to be able to make more stuff. What do I do to wages? Well, if I pay workers less, I could afford more of them, or more capital, or more resources, whatever. I could afford to produce more if I'm paying less for my workers. So, explain what happened in the long run. In the long run, firms will cut wages so that they could hire more people, buy more capital, buy more resources, etc., which will do what to the graph? What line has to move in the long run? SRAS. It'll have to increase to get back to full employment. Okay, so it's a bit. Because it has to be to graph it for part 2 here. Something like this. That your SRAS curve should increase to get back to long run equilibrium. And says to show how it affects the economy, well, it affects it by getting me a lower price level, which is why I label that equilibrium right here. Need that. Don't have to label a new GDP, because ideally in the long run you get back to full employment. That's kind of the whole frickin' point of the long run self-adjustment, is to like fix the economy. So hopefully it would fix it. That's the basic idea there. So that's B on this one. You have to explain it verbally, which is the in the long run explanation that hopefully students you've seen a billion times, but I've also said a couple times in this video. And then the graph, which always has to just be SRAS moving to get back to full employment. And again, that's what happens when the question asks in the long run. C. Math! Good God. Look at all the math. It's just a multiplier problem. Shouldn't be that bad, but let's see. Suppose Coolway, which, boy howdy, these questions have some of the dumbest names of countries you've ever seen. Coolway's government is unwilling to wait for the long run adjustment process. Dog, I get it. That's pretty normal. The MPC is 0.8, just meaning that people spend 80% of their disposable income. Their equilibrium output is 500 billion, and the full employment output is 540. Now, you don't have to label this on the graph, but to show you what they mean something like this. That our current GDP at the start of this problem is 500, and that the LRAS is drawn at 540, meaning our GDP is $40 billion below what it's supposed to be. That our GDP is $40 billion less than it should be. We are below full employment by $40 billion. Okay. CI, calculate the minimum change and indicate the direction. They mean increase or decrease. The indicate direction is a weird thing to phrase it as, but they mean, are you going to be increasing or decreasing government spending in this situation to shift AD by the amount of the gap? Okay, so there's a formula for this. It is an initial change in spending times your spending multiplier equals the change in GDP, aggregate demand, or income. It says aggregate demand, so I'm going to use that here. So it's change in spending times your spending multiplier, I just say S-mult, equals the change in aggregate demand. Now, here's the tricky part for students a lot of the time. They mix up what they're solving for. Because you read the formula and you're like, okay, so I got to solve for the change in AD. I actually don't have to solve for that. Read the question. Calculate the minimum change and indicate the direction of the change in government spending. The question's not asking for how much to change AD by. It's asking how much to change spending by. This delta S, change in spending, is what I'm solving for. Delta S times our spending multiplier, which your spending multiplier, for those of you guys that forget, is 1 over the MPS. Now my MPC here is 0.8, meaning we spend 80% of our income. If that's true, how much are we saving? Well, if I'm spending 80%, I'd be saving 20% of my income. So 0.2 would be my MPS, so my multiplier would be 1 over 0.2, which we'll solve for in a second. And you're like, well, what's the change in AD then? It's asking to shift the AD curve by the amount of the output gap. How big's the gap? Our GDP is 500 billion. It's supposed to be 540. The gap is 40. The output gap is $40 billion. So it's delta S times 1 over 0.2 equals 40 billion. 1 over 0.2, in case you're not that good at math, is 5. So it's delta S times 5 equals 40 billion, which we're going to translate that into people words and say, what times 5 is 40? Well, that'd be 8. So my delta S, my change in spending, should be 8 billion, don't forget the billion, dollars. When it says direction, it means are we increasing or decreasing it? Well, we got to increase government spending because we're trying to get GDP to go up by 40. So we need spending to go up by 8 billion in that context. So there is my work. If you're wondering, it's to show your work. This is what I would show. This is a sufficient amount of work for the AP exam. Again, you'll have a calculator on the AP exam. So in terms of, you don't really have to do math, but you have to show the math you do to get the answer, which involves just formula, plug and chug, that kind of thing. And then the last one here, C2, calculate the minimum change and indicate the direction of the change in taxes required to shift the aggregate demand. Okay, very similar formula. It is change in taxes times your tax multiplier equals the change in aggregate demand. All right, not too bad. The change in taxes is what I'm solving for again, so I don't know that. I'm just going to call that delta T. My tax multiplier is negative MPC over MPS, so that'd be negative 0.8 over 0.2. And that equals, again, this 40 billion change in GDP. So it's something times negative 0.8 over 0.2 gets me $40 billion. Well, let's solve the negative 0.8 over 0.2 thing. Negative 0.8 over 0.2, you can use a calculator, but in case you're wondering, it's just 8 over 2. So that'd be negative 4 equals 40 billion. So it's something times negative 4 gets me 40 billion. The negative is weird, but you'll see why in a second. Because that means that my change in taxes also has to be negative to have those signs cancel to get to the positive 40. So if I divide that 40 billion by negative 4, it would get me the answer, which is that I would need to change taxes by negative $10 billion. Now, negative. Why is it negative? Well, if I need GDP to go up by 40 billion, would I need to be raising or lowering taxes? Like, think about how fiscal policy works for a second. Am I raising or lowering taxes if I want GDP to go up? Well, I would need to be lowering taxes so people could spend more money. So it's negative 10 billion because they're dropping taxes by 10 billion, so we spend 40 billion more via the multiplier effect. So it's negative 10 billion, the negative telling me the direction. So you could say they need to change taxes by negative 10 billion, or what probably makes more sense to write verbally is that the government would need to decrease taxes by 10 billion. That's the direction they're referring to when it says indicate the direction of the change. Okay. And then question 4, last one. Assuming the economy is in long-run equilibrium. Frickin' sick. Let's do it. Draw me an ADS graph, have LRAS here, and have your current equilibrium output and price level, YE and PLE respectively. Hey, look! It only told me to label one X value. Right? It's just YE. There's no Y1 and YF. There's just one X value. Why? Because I'm at long-run equilibrium. There's only one X value to label. Dang. I'm drawing, if you're wondering. I make noises when I draw the graphs. You have to spice it up. It gets very boring if you don't, because you draw so many of these graphs. I only have one X value to label because there's only one X value here. At that spot right there. YEPLE. Which, why am I labeling it YE and PLE, Mr. McRitchie? Sometimes you label it YF. On the AP exam, you label it whatever the hell it tells you to label it as. In class, I have like specifics that I like to use to be consistent. But the AP exam is kind of, if you look at previous questions, it isn't always YE. And sometimes it's Y1, sometimes it's YF. If it said to label it Gary, you just write Gary on the graph. Like, label it whatever they tell you to label it as. Don't fight the AP exam. It literally just tells you what to label it as. Just label it that way. So this is, there's my equilibrium output and price level right there. Bada-bang. Like that. And that's A. On 4, done. Beautiful. B. Assume the government increases spending on national defense without raising taxes. Okay. The important thing here is the government's increasing spending. It's telling you that it's not raising taxes because some people believe that you need to have the tax revenue to do that spending. You don't. But it's just telling you that to say that taxes haven't changed. They have increased spending. I, on your graph, show how the government action affects aggregate demand. Hey! It frickin' told me which line. That's awesome. I love when they do that. Because sometimes they will tell you, just like, hey, how does this affect AD? And you're like, oh, it does affect AD. My brain farted for a bit, so I forgot. But yes, government spending affects aggregate demand. They increase that spending, so AD is gonna rise. Y1, PL1, like this. This is what has happened on my graph. Look at that. We increased aggregate demand. How very cool of us. We are now above full employment. That's actually low-key, kind of bad, but great. 2, how will this government action affect the unemployment rate in the short run? Explain. So what happens to unemployment rate here? That's what they're telling me. And I'm like, what the hell? Unemployment's not on this graph, Mr. McRitchie. How the hell do we know what happens to unemployment? Ah! You freaking dummy! Ugh, you're all so stupid. No, I'm kidding. It's because of GDP. Remember that GDP is the total dollar value of everything that we're producing in a given year. It's a good measure of our spending and of our income. What this is telling me is that we're spending more money, right? So businesses are presumably making more money. And if business makes more money, what can they do more easily? Hire people. Oh. So if GDP is going up, more people should be getting jobs, so unemployment should be going down. GDP and unemployment have an inverse relationship, mostly. Explaining it, you can't just say, because GDP and unemployment are inversely related, and GDP went up, unemployment goes down. No, you have to tell them, like, how does that work? So, explanation, here's a good answer. As government spending increases, that increases overall GDP. That means businesses are going to be making more money and therefore can afford to hire more workers, thereby reducing unemployment rate. There's my answer. That includes the explanation. Government spent more money, so now the businesses are making more money. Sick. They can now hire more people. Great. Which means unemployment goes down. Checks out. All that lines up. If you need me to say it again, rewind 30 seconds in the video and you'll see me say it again. But the basic idea is government spending goes up, GDP goes up, businesses make more money, can hire more people, unemployment goes down. That's the basic idea. Write it as a sentence, though. These are FRQs, complete sentences, gang. And then C. Assume that the economy adjusts to a new long-run equilibrium after the increase in government spending. God, they did it again. It's another long-run self-assessment question. Like I told you, they'd be in every one of these questions. So how will the SRAS curve in the new long-run equilibrium compare with that in the original long-run equilibrium in part A, and explain? One horrible way to phrase this. What they're asking is, what will happen to SRAS in the long run here? Okay, like how will it look compared to the original SRAS curve? Well, we're currently above full employment now, right? We're at this red AD1 and that purple SRAS. We are ahead of where we're supposed to. Again, in the long run, SRAS has to shift to get back to long-run equilibrium. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to draw this shift back. I'm going to draw SRAS shifting back to the left to get back to long-run equilibrium. I'm technically doing the graph part of C2 first before I write the explanation, but that kind of doesn't matter. And it tells me in C2 to label the new equilibrium price level as PL2. That is also a hint. See, PL2 is my new one. My SRS curve has shifted to the left. I am now up where the two red lines intersect with the LRAS, much higher up. Why does it say PL2 and not a new Y value? I know, a new X value, I should say. Because there isn't a new X value, right? We started at YE. We increased GDP because AD went up. And then we go back to YE. I don't need a new label there because I already have a label there. So it's again a hint. If you thought, for whatever reason, you're again, brain fart, right? That I need to move this SRAS curve over to the right, or this LRAS curve over to the right, I would need a new X value labeled, right? It doesn't say to label a new X value because there isn't a new X value to label. The question's dropping hints. The question's giving you some, like, if you're really reading it carefully and looking at it, you're like, wait a minute, it doesn't say to label a new X value because there isn't a new X value. You're going back to the original. The answer for AI in the explanation, that same paragraphy sentence that I keep saying. In the long run, firms will blank wages so that they can blank workers and then they can get back to full employment. In this case, what we need to do, we need SRAS to, what I had happen here was that SRAS in the long run decreased. That means I need businesses to be paying their workers more, which is, again, kind of cool, right? Pay your workers more, but if you do that, you can't afford as many of them, so you'll be laying off some people, or you can't afford as many resources, or you can't afford the training that those workers need, or whatever. Like, you don't have more money magically. So you're raising these people's salaries and having to lay some off, which will decrease your overall productivity. Some people, I've seen some students argue that if you pay your workers more, they will work harder. That is not proven to be true. Like, people who work low-income jobs also work hard. Like I'm a teacher. We don't get paid amazing. I work pretty hard. I'm making this video. Like, it's not about salary equals harder work, more production. That isn't necessarily true. So you gotta be careful about that thing. What we go from is like cost of production is the simplest. It's the simplest logic behind it. So that if we increase wages, that is a higher cost of production, means we shouldn't be able to produce as much. So supply will drop, which will get us back to full employment. In this case, that's what we want. We need supply to drop. So it's actually good that higher wages hurts supply. That's kind of what we need to have happen. And that's the basic idea here. And this is the full drawing for C2. So we've already done that. Again, like the previous question, and in the title of this assignment that I gave the students, it says, don't do parts D or E because we haven't covered that yet. We haven't covered this yet, so we're not going to bother with 4, D, or E. And that is it for the FRQs. Now, I didn't have any questions from students in this chat. I'm going to refresh it just to see. I had some kids that looked like pop in and out at various points in the live stream, but I don't see Any questions? So I would assume that they just saw me do the FRQs and were like, sick, the FRQs are being done, so they'll come check back this video later. In which case, if you watch this later, fantastic. If you're needing a review for the AP exam and you wanted to watch someone answer some FRQs, congratulations, you've got me to answer some FRQs for you. That's certainly not a bad thing. But overall, the big things for Unit 3 that you really got to make sure you have down are, in simplest terms, the ADAS graph. I mean, you kind of have to have that graph nailed. At least know what stuff affects aggregate demand, know what stuff affects aggregate supply, be able to draw it. Like, if you're ever in doubt on a test question, on an AP exam question, on the multiple choice section especially, draw the graph, dude. At least use the finger graph method of like, okay, this line should move like this line should move like this. Like, when in doubt, draw it out, for sure. On test day, if you have scratch paper, you should pre-draw a good number of graphs. Some at full employment, some in an inflationary gap, some in a recessionary gap, so that you already have them to work with. There is some math in this unit. Don't forget your multiplier stuff. It isn't that hard of math, but you need to know the formulas and read the questions carefully to see what they're asking for. Like in this third FRQ here, it was asking how much it was going to change spending and taxes by. It actually gave you the change in GDP that we're usually solving for in those problems. So you have to really read the questions carefully. Like, wait, what is it asking for? Oh, it's asking for the change in spending because that's a gap of $40 billion of GDP. GDP is the x-axis on my ADS graph. So be very, very careful and read the questions very carefully when it comes to the multiplier stuff, because it could ask about a bunch of different things in that formula. They're all fair game. Make sure you know your fiscal policies. Again, that's not honestly all that complicated outside of just review some vocab, like review the automatic stabilizers vocab. That's always a thing people forget to think about. We have good notes over that. If you don't have those notes, feel free to watch the video earlier in Unit 3 for this channel. It covers them, I think, pretty sufficiently. I'm fairly good at explaining it. And that's all the big stuff. If you have further questions for me, students that are in my class, feel free to ask them in the comments or in class or via email. If you're not in my class and you're just watching this to review for your exam, best of luck. Feel free to shoot a question in the comments here. I'll do my best to answer it. If there's a thing in here that you never understood, either feel free to watch a previous video of mine or ask it in the comments, and that's totally fine. And as a reward, Archer, come here. Let's see if the dog responds. He's very sleepy all the time. Archer, come on. Where are you, bud? He's fully asleep on my bed. 1000%. Come on, come here. I found him. Ah, oh, come here. Come here. I want to make you on. I want to put you on camera for a second. Is that okay? Oh, he despises being put on camera. But as a reward for any of you who stood to the end of the video to watch, Archer is now appearing on camera. He is now here. He is here, and he is not happy that I'm holding him against his will. He hates being lifted up. Oh, don't you breathe on me. Your breath is terrible. But yes, good boy. Good boy. Okay, wish them all good luck, Archer, on their tests and all that stuff. Can you wish them good luck? Can you be good? Speak. He doesn't know that trick. I'm just seeing if he was going to do it. All right, off the thing. There you go. And he is shedding, of course, so there's just hair all over me now. All right, well, thank you all for watching. I wish you all the absolute best of luck on the test. If you're watching this review for the test, on the AP exam, if you're watching it for that reason, or whatever, hope you all have a great rest of your day. Greatly appreciate you spending your time with me, and I wish you all the best. Have a good day.